You may have a different blood type, but think about it. Regardless of where these populations were studied, it's basically carnivore, 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 carnivore. It's not carnivore, but this particular meat because they had that blood group. Our ancestors couldn't have measured blood group.
I agree. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of cows out there with different blood types and they're all eating grass.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, great. Well put. Very well put.
women fare differently on a carnivore diet to men, and their requirements are totally different.
Oh, that's a really interesting proposition. Women's requirements are always going to be different to men, right?
It's controversial these days.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Watch me get cancelled now.
Cortisol and insulin are stress hormones.
Cortisol is seen as the stress hormone. I do get that, but it's crucial for homeostasis. You need cortisol. If you have no stress, i.e. what cortisol is responding to, and you have no cortisol, you would literally be dead. When you wake up, you're going to get a bit of a cortisol increase because being alive is a type of stress. When we say the word stress, typically in layman's terms, it means there's something really difficult happening at work and you're going to sit there at home and do this and rub your forehead and, oh, I've got this thing to deal with. In colloquial terms, in English language, yeah, that's what we can describe as stress. In biology, a stress is anything that kind of shifts things away from an equilibrium, if you like. So the cortisol is being released is to try and get you back to equilibrium. It's not the cortisol that should be demonized. It's your choices, your conscious choices in your life that have led to a shift away from equilibrium. And that's what actually you need to be looking at. When it comes to insulin, again, insulin is not a demon. It is there to do specific roles. And if you think there are problems going on in your body related to insulin, you have to understand insulin is responding to your conscious choice. For example, what you're eating. Anything in your body that is in that nature, so biochemistry as a whole, you can't control that. You have zero conscious control over what an enzyme does or what a receptor does or what a hormone does or where it goes. And because it's out of your conscious control, it therefore must be responding to things in conscious control for the most part. And I say for the most part because there are things other people do to you. For example, during trauma, someone attacks you, you're going to be very stressed and cortisol will be released. So you shouldn't be worrying about things like cortisol and insulin. You should be worrying about the correct diet and lifestyle, in my personal view.
Breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
I was taught this as a child. I wish I wasn't. There is no such thing, in my view, as one meal being more important than another. Each meal serves the same purpose. You know, we've just spoken about turning the food we eat into ATP. When the end result of glycolysis and beta oxidation, in terms of the end goal, is the same for both sides of that coin, why would one particular meal, giving, say, glucose or fatty acid, be more important than another when the end goal is exactly the same? So to me, it makes no sense paleobiologically that one is more important than the other when the purpose of both is simply to make ATP.
Beta oxidation is preferable over glycolysis.
So for those who don't know, let me just briefly say what those technical terms are. Beta oxidation is the way we use fats for metabolic process, and glycolysis is the way we use glucose for metabolic process. Now, you can say, this is my personal view, the body will always prefer to keep running on one rather than both at the same time. That's a topic for a different discussion. But I think that is the case, and it's important to say. When you are using one, in my personal guess, it takes about 2 to 4 days to try to shift back to something else. So when you are running on just one, that's your preference, instead of braking like a freight train and then shifting in the other way. Now, if you get a choice of which one to run on, you can look at the equations in total of the starting product and the end product and all the coenzymes and things that are involved. And without being too technical, we can get more stuff out of fat than we can from glucose. Now, to add a technical term in, to explain that in a little bit more detail, the reason we eat food, or one of the reasons we eat food, for metabolic process is because that is what we use to ultimately derive something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is a currency that factories in the cell spend in order for something to happen. A liver cell breaking or detoxifying something, a skin cell making collagen, a brain cell sending an action potential, a nervous impulse, etc., etc. And when you look at the amount of ATP generated by using a fatty acid such as, say, palmitic acid versus an individual glucose molecule, we see the efficiency is much, much higher in terms of, say, miles per gallon. And we see the higher amount of ATP that is generated with that beta oxidation than with glycolysis. And that's just the number of ATP that's produced. We also have to look at the inherent nature of these molecules when they build up. So when a lot of fat builds up, it's inert. It's not doing anything. It's just a guy turning up next to you at the same bus stop, minding his own business. Glucose, on the other hand, cannot help itself. In the linear form of glucose on carbon number 1, there is a double bond between carbon and oxygen. And the great electronegativity difference between the oxygen and the carbon draws the electrons towards the oxygen, generating a dipole in the local area. That dipole then makes oxygen like a rabid dog. It just wants to touch everything that comes past. And therein lies the source of glycation and why we look at a HbA1c on a blood test. Glucose is the person that comes to the bus stop while you're already sat there. And instead of just minding its own business, like fat, it sits there and it sits uncomfortably close to you and asks you questions that are really weird and just pokes you for no reason and then just runs around in front of you trying to get your attention when you just want to be left alone. And you think, go away, right? That's what glucose is doing to protein. That's the process of glycation. That's where we have things like the Maillard reaction, the Amadori rearrangement, ketosamine production, cross-linking, advanced glycation end products, if people want to go and Google those things. So based on just those two factors alone, I think it's pretty obvious to anyone in the know, it's fat that is preferred by the body, if there was such a thing as the body preferring anything.
Women fare differently on a carnivore diet to men, and their requirements are totally different.
Oh, that's a really interesting proposition. I think women's requirements as a living organism, sorry for the phrase, but I think it'll make sense in a second, are always going to be different to men, right? For obvious reasons.
It's controversial these days.
Yeah, I know. Watch me get cancelled now. But, there are certain things, I don't wish to bring up controversy and things, but I'll stick to facts, which people can't deny. Women can give birth, right? Men can't give birth. That's a pretty big difference as far as biology is concerned. So it makes sense that, the requirements are going to be slightly different. And I suspect because of things like that, and the ability to store product for metabolic use later on, I think that's clearly going to be different as well, not just across communities in different countries and landscapes and environments, but even across the genders. I think that's going to be quite different as well. As to whether they fare differently on carnivore, my personal belief is they'll probably fare different on any diet, including carnivore. I was speaking to Richard Smith recently, who's also been on your channel, great nutritionist. His personal view, I believe, or when I spoke to him, it may have changed by the time this comes out, his personal view is men tend to prefer eating maybe once a day on carnivore. Women tend to prefer more towards 2, a little bit more. And I think that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's when you get hungry, that's fine, go for it. If you are eating properly and you notice slightly different changes, so for example, if the man in a couple is faring a little bit better in terms of body composition optimization speed, that's fine. Because the women may be in a particular period of her life in terms of fertility, where the body composition optimization speed may not be the same as a man for the purposes of fertility in those sorts of situations. So I think it's expected there's going to be some differences. But honestly, my advice to people is, so what? It doesn't change your conscious decisions. It doesn't mean suddenly you need to now go eat whatever the latest burgers are called at McDonald's. I don't actually know. But McNuggets, I know McNuggets. So it doesn't mean you need to go and eat McNuggets all of a sudden. Your dietary choices, your lifestyle choices are still the same. And let the things in your body out of your conscious control just be whatever they may be. That's my advice to people.
Cool. Blood types indicate different dietary requirements for certain individuals.
I've heard this. I disagree, personally. I think what dictates dietary requirement is taking a magnifying glass to metabolic process in the body and looking at processes like glycolysis and beta oxidation and these sorts of things, and looking at what cells require in terms of raw products to carry out their jobs. That can then be translated to, okay, what do we need to put in our mouth, i.e. the diet. It's not that complicated in my view. You may have a different blood type, but think about it, when you look at references such as Bendor 2021, and you look at these stabilized testing results, regardless of where these populations were studied, it's basically carnivore, 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 carnivore. It's not carnivore, but this particular meat because they had that blood group.
Yeah.
Our ancestors couldn't have measured blood group. And they all ended up eating the same thing. And we're here today. That means it worked. If we weren't here today, that means it didn't work. So just using paleobiology, looking at the way we are today, looking at historical empirical measurements with the research of like things like Bendor 2021. I think there's far too much evidence to suggest that that has any merit whatsoever, in my personal view.
I agree. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of cows out there with different blood types and they're all eating grass.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, great. Well put. Very well put.
yeah. We need to drink around 8 glasses of water a day for proper hydration.
This is a funny one.
True.
I mean, if it's a thimble, fine. I'm sure you'll be fine. But being serious for a second, I think that's probably detrimental to your health, frankly. When you drink and drink and drink, and it comes out clear on the other end, I mean, just think about it with common sense. Like, your body's not using it. What does that tell you? It doesn't need it. We have evolved with not just the feelings of hunger and satiety, but thirst as well, and feeling like we've drunk enough. And if we forget those things, because someone says you have to drink 8 glasses of water a day, I think that's just stupid. I think drink if you feel thirsty, and when you feel like you've had enough, stop. People don't realize, the movement of water, the osmotic movement is based on something called a water potential gradient. If you imagine a puddle of water, let's say in my hand here, and I have a sponge, let's say this black thing here this battery is a sponge. When I drop that there's zero water in the sponge, but there's maximum water around, which means the concentration is highest around and lowest in the sponge. What happens is water moves down that concentration gradient. So it goes from an area of high concentration to low concentration. I know we're getting into biochemistry here, but I think if people genuinely believe 8 glasses of water is good for them, this will help them realize it's not. So it goes into the sponge. That's why when you drop a tissue on water, it immediately goes into the tissue. It's moving down the water potential gradient. But it's not just into sponges or tissues. It's across biological membranes as well. For example, going from the blood into the cell. And if you put a massive amount of water in the blood, very high concentration there, and now relatively low concentration in the cell. So it all floods into the cell. And there's only so much a cell can hold. And eventually you get to a point of lysis, Lysis, basically cell death. It can also be called cytolysis, cyto meaning cell, lysis meaning death. And so if you drink 8 glasses of water, even medium-sized glasses, and you push all this water into the cell, down the water potential gradient, and you cause cytolysis to occur because of osmotic movement, that is just dumb, frankly. Why would you want to try and push your cells closer and closer to lysis? As well as that, how can your digestive system work properly? The stomach acid the clue is in the name, it's an acid, right? Water is not an acid. It's in the middle of that spectrum. It's pH 7 by definition. If you dilute that acid in your stomach by drinking loads of water, how well is your ability to catabolize the food that you eat going to be? It's terrible now, because you don't have really acid anymore. You've got very weak acid. So how can you break it down and absorb everything efficiently? There's multiple reasons why that's stupid, all born out of biochemistry, so not opinion either. And I think it's really important that people look at that if they truly believe that 2 liters a day or 8 glasses a day is what they're actually genuinely meant to be doing.
We need to include liver on a carnivore diet for optimal results.
Let me answer this initially with a thought experiment. Think of a cell in your body, anywhere. That cell needs a particular nutrient, let's say, vitamin B3, or a particular electrolyte, like calcium. Let's say this calcium now arrives at that cell. Has the cell got any idea where it's actually come from? In terms of, was it from that restaurant or that supermarket, or this friend that cooked it for you, or this liver, etc., etc. Calcium's calcium. So the cell's ability to respond does not depend on the source necessarily when you look at things in isolation. And when you understand that perspective, then you understand my answer, which is the requirement for nutrients in the diet doesn't change. If you get that from liver, fine. If you get that from eating sirloin steak with the fat on, fine. Because when that, let's say, heme iron goes to the cell has no idea whether it was from a steak or a liver. It is a means to obtaining the required nutrients for metabolic process, macro and micro. If you have more than is required of any nutrient, either in isolation or combination, you may end up with problems. And with liver, you may go down that road of having more than is required, in which case you would end up with problems. In the same way that if you have, let's pick a ridiculous number that's never going to happen, like 25 kilos of steak in one meal, you're going to have problems with that, obviously. You'll probably explode. There is a relative perspective of meeting your requirements and not going above that, which is why we feel hungry and why we feel full. So it's not that liver is required, in my view. It is macro and micronutrients are required, and liver is one means to obtaining those ends, which could be abused by people if they are not aware of certain risks of toxicity by eating too much of something.
Sulforaphane, a property found in cruciferous vegetables, helps to fight cancer.
Theoretically, yes, but practically, it's not that simple. First of all, just for the people watching from different parts of the world, this word is I find this word is pronounced differently in different countries. Lee's pronounced it one way. A friend of mine, or a mutual friend of ours, pronounces it sulforaphane. I say sulforaphane. It's all the same thing. Like, it doesn't. No one really cares as long as you know what you're talking about. So this particular molecule is present in cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli. What happens is there is a substance known as glucoraphanin, as well as an enzyme called myrosinase. Myrosinase carries out its enzymatic activity on glucoraphanin as the substrate, and we end up with sulforaphane, for example, during trauma, when it's broken apart, or during eating. Sulforaphane can undergo or can carry out the process of something called clastogenesis, which is damage to genetic material. And if you think about that, that can hurt any cell. So can it fight cancer? Well, if it damages the cancer cell, then technically, yeah. But that's like saying, there's a guy that goes around stabbing people for no reason. Like, can he fight criminals? Well, yeah. But would you want to go near him? No. If this vegetable or this compound is going around stabbing genetic material, great. Do it to cancer. Hence why it is a chemotherapeutic agent, I believe, and is used in chemotherapy, if I'm not mistaken. Please do correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. If you don't have cancer and you eat, why would you eat that and get it to go around everywhere? If you do have to work with a guy that just goes around stabbing people, why would you just put him anywhere? You'd want to put him in front of, the people carrying out an assault on someone else to defend the innocent victim. So it makes no sense to have this thing that can cause clastogenesis everywhere. I think that's just nonsense, personally.
Yeah. We don't get sufficient amounts of calcium on a carnivore diet.
I think it's possible to not get sufficient amounts of anything on any diet if you eat inappropriately. As an example, in the context of a carnivore diet, as another example, I think that's possible, but it's not because of the diet. Are you eating enough on the diet? That's another question entirely. If you eat enough, i.e., until you're full, hence why we have the feeling of feeling full, then I think you should be fine. If you eat till you're full, is it still possible to be deficient in certain things? My personal view on the carnivore diet, my personal view is yes, because it also depends on what you're eating. Let's pretend, for example, you just have a really lean meat, like a turkey or something, and you eat until you're full, but you have turkey, and there's no fat on it. Yes, you're eating till you're full, and you're better off than someone that's drinking Coca-Cola all day, but also more likely you're going to still be deficient in certain nutrients at the end of the day. And so I don't think it's a function of the diet to be deficient in any particular thing when it comes to carnivore. I think it's a function of how you are implementing that diet in your individual circumstances. That's all.
1 to 2 meals per day is more beneficial than 3 to 5.
I think the number of meals for certain individuals may be better at that particular point in their life with this number rather than this number. But only the individual will be able to figure that out based on their signaling of feeling hungry. I think when someone is transitioning into a particular diet, or let's say, let's pick an example, standard Western diet into carnivore, standard Western diet where they're used to 3 meals all the time. Body's probably going to get used to timing of meals and they'll just expect a meal. So it's perfectly okay to have the 3 meals on carnivore as you improve your ability to sense hunger and satiety and then change that over time. And that's fine. I don't have an issue with that at all. But in terms of which is better, I think your body will tell you for you individually which is better. Let's take a national average. Let's say the national average might be 1.75, roughly. But if you get hungry twice a day, just eat twice a day. You need to listen to your body, not national averages. And as you get better and better in your diet, eating healthier and healthier in a way that I'm sure both of us would agree, then that sense of what does my body want, that question is answered much more accurately because you're getting your feelings of being in touch with your body, of sensing hunger and satiety much, much better. And it may even be different as you go through stressful periods, or maybe when you're on the move versus sat at home. Let it be whatever it may be. It might not even be the same every single day. That's my advice to people.
Higher levels of cholesterol on a carnivore diet can cause cardiovascular issues.
Is a really common yet understandable concern. Let's contextualize it by saying we've all been told that cholesterol is a demon. Let's put it this way. If you stop getting cholesterol in you from the diet, what does your body do? It makes more of its own. What does that tell you? Okay? Think about it in this analogy. Imagine the left and the right of the screen, the temperature scale. And we're here, 37 degrees centigrade internally. Homeostasis keeps it there. Remember, we spoke about at the beginning, everything needs to be in equilibrium. If we shift away, homeostasis is about getting things back to the middle. That's 37. And we try and move this person to be really cold. What's the body going to do? Put it back here. If we make them jump in a sauna and put them over here, what's the body going to do? It's going to push them back over here. What does that tell you about being here? That's optimal. Yeah, exactly. That's the sweet spot for survival and replication as a species. You can do that with any process in the body. Now let's take cholesterol. If you stop eating cholesterol and you try and push it down, what does the body do? It keeps going up. Yeah, it's not rocket science. So we know that we have to have cholesterol, and we're dead without it. We're made of cholesterol. It's part of, it's lodged within membranes, a lot of the brain is made out of cholesterol. It's absolutely essential. And when you look at any evidence that people show you, I believe there's not really any merit to it. I know that's a bold claim because I'm talking about all evidence pretty much, but it's just so difficult to control because nutritional studies can't be done with control for many reasons, which I'm sure people in this community know. But if you do want to look at evidence, well, let's look at the biggest evidence set available. The data collected by the World Health Organization and the British Heart Foundation together, which was, and I might be wrong on this, so please do correct me in the comments if I am, but I think it was something like 13 million people. What happened? At the lowest points of cholesterol, we saw the highest incidence of death, total cholesterol. At the highest point of cholesterol, we saw the lowest incidence of death. I mean, how much more clear can it be? It's ridiculous. So I don't think it's something to be worried about in the sense of it's going to go up. I mean, I'm in statin territory now, absolutely. But do I have any symptoms? No, I feel bloody brilliant all the time. But it is something to be worried about in terms of too low. Okay, you have serious issues. I mean, children that are born with issues where they just can't synthesize cholesterol, they have limb deficiencies, limb abnormalities, severe mental retardation, brain malfunction, maldevelopment of the brain. You do not want to be there. What does that tell you, about cholesterol? What is it useful for? Everything, absolutely everything. No question for me. It's been demonized unnecessarily. And I personally think, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I think there's a lot of money to be made in drugs. It's not that controversial to say, to be fair. But I think it may have played a role, to be polite, shall we say.
Diet does not affect oral health as long as you're brushing your teeth.
So diet, I believe, is always going to affect your overall health, regardless of which part of the body you're looking at. It has to. How can it not? That's the source of everything. That's the source of metabolism. Metabolism is how we take stuff, like out here in the world, and make it stuff here inside us. And so our diet is part of what's out in the world, and we put it inside us. So of course it's going to help. Of course it's going to make things potentially worse or potentially better. So it can help the oral health. It can degrade the oral health. Now, in terms of the oral hygiene regime, i.e. whether you're brushing your teeth or not, how effective are you in your oral hygiene regime? Are you able to clear somehow 100% of plaque 100% of the time, such that there is no bacteria left behind, such as, say, Streptococcus mutans, to then break down your tissues and cause damage? Now, let's say, for instance, you have a really poor diet and you are a perfect brusher of your teeth. Let's take that example. Yes, you may not have any plaque on your teeth at that point, but because you are probably going to get diabetes in a split second, that diabetes is not restricted to everywhere but the mouth. And so if you have those issues going and affecting your whole body, affect the function of every single organ, and let's say, for instance, you have damage to your mouth and some blood is pouring out, well, what's in that blood if you're diabetic? There's a glucose level. And that glucose level can also be eaten by the bacteria in the mouth. I said, yes, can you clear all the plaque 100% of the time? Even if you do, it doesn't mean you're bacteria-free in the mouth. There's still a microbiome. If there's glucose still going in because of all these sorts of things, you're still going to get affected. Your ability to heal is, in the oral cavity is still going to be affected. And that's just one example. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go through tens and tens of examples, but that's one example where absolutely a terrible diet, even with perfect oral health, can still make your oral health worse, I would say.
Every edible plant contains toxins.
I agree with this statement. I would go further and say different plants have toxins to varying degrees based on their individual evolutionary path. And I think the reason it's there is because if you think just with common sense for a second, every living organism is here because of all the miles that has traveled down the road of evolution to this particular place in time right now. And no organism has gone down that road and arrived here to still be here with no type of defense. People say, oh, well, humans don't have a defense. Yes, we do. We have probably the most advanced brain of all organisms on the planet. And even though we don't have sharp claws or pointy teeth or prickles that come out of us or venom that shoots out, we have a brain that could develop tools and hunt animals multiple times our size. And that brain and that manual dexterity was combined with the ability to create social connections, to work as a team. And that's our adaptation. And plants are no exception. Just because they don't look like they have claws, well, to be fair, you have things like cactuses with spikes, right? That's an evolutionary mechanism. But also there are biochemical mechanisms as well. And they're designed to allow the plant to survive. And what kind of things do you need to do in order to make sure that you survive? Well, you need to take resources away from other things. It's a dog-eat-dog world, I think is the phrase there. So that's absolutely why we have really obvious examples like poison ivy. But there are things which may not be as obvious, but they're still present all the time. Little toxins that we even probably haven't discovered yet, things that are possible carcinogens. And I think, yeah, pretty much every single organism has a mechanism of some kind to survive. And in plants, it's the ability to become a biochemical engineer. And that's their mechanism. Whereas in animals, a lot of time it's something physical, like strength and claws and teeth and things like that.
Ketones are beneficial for our mitochondria.
I think ketones can be beneficial to people. If they are abused, that's a different situation. However, there is activity in our organs at a certain level based on the fuel it's running on. And ketones are just another type of fuel. When we run on those fuels, rather than, let's say, a load of glucose, we get different activity levels. And things like muscle performance, I believe, is higher on things like ketones rather than other things. Brain function, I believe, is higher on ketones rather than other things. When it comes to mitochondria, overall, and I'm going to talk about a big picture view now. Let's pretend you are someone who drifts in and out of ketosis semi-regularly, day in, day out, that kind of thing. You're as a body, as a person, you have ketones flowing through you to some light nutritional level. Those levels are better for your overall health, which includes your mitochondria. Now let's think of an alternative. Let's say you're running on glucose all the time, loads of glucose in your blood all the time. Maybe you're pre-diabetic or something, or on your way to being pre-diabetic, something along those lines. Those fuels are going to cause glycation damage, and they are going to cause stress to the cell to try and cope with those types of damages. And it's not just the mitochondria, yes, that as well, but the whole cell. And in that perspective, I think, yeah, ketones are better for mitochondria than alternatives in situations like that.